In this video, we're breaking down every draft class in the NFC South and giving each team a letter grade. And the NFC South had a couple of my least favorite draft classes, unfortunately, and we're going to start out with one of those, the Atlanta Falcons. Now, if you're a Falcons fan, I'm sure you've heard so much criticism of the Michael Penix pick. I also disagree with it wholeheartedly on both levels. I disagree with the player evaluation. I didn't have him as a first-round quarterback prospect. I like the arm talent. He has shown flashes of elite ball placement, but the accuracy is just not consistent. He left so many big plays on the field. He doesn't really extend or create plays outside of the pocket, although he has the athletic traits to maybe incorporate more of that into his game. And then as far as processing and decision-making, he will lock onto his first read, ignore dropping zone coverage defenders, didn't really target the middle of the field that often in Washington's offense. A lot of his production was just jump balls that were kind of in the general vicinity of Rome Odunze. And then I'm not breaking any news or saying anything that really everyone else hasn't already said, but taking Michael Penix after signing Kirk Cousins just doesn't make sense to me. I guess if I had a first round grade on Michael Penix, it would make more sense, but this isn't like a young player that you want to sit and develop. I just don't get the process at all. And then they trade up to 35 for Clemson defensive lineman Rook Ororo, giving up 79 to the Falcons. To me, he was a third to fourth round prospect. I think there are some enticing athletic traits. He had a really good combine performance, and Clemson's defensive scheme, I think, prevented him from really showing what he was capable of as a pass rusher. When he did get true pass rushing opportunities, he's got a nice swipe rip and club rip move, but overall, I didn't think his hand usage was that developed. He's a pretty good run defender, especially out in open space. He does a good job shedding blocks. When he gets into the backfield, he's so controlled, breaking down an open space and finishing those TFL opportunities, but I definitely want to keep him away from double teams. I don't really think he has the strength or the anchor to hold up at the point of attack like that. Again, I think he's a solid player with some upside, but 34 is way too rich for me, especially when you're talking about trading up for him and giving up a third round pick. They took Braylon Trice at 74. He was my 74th ranked player, so perfectly good with that pick. He's a power rusher with heavy hands, not a good athlete. He pretty much never left the field for Washington's defense, and he racked up a ton of pressures, actually led college football in pressures last season. I don't think he has the upside to be a number one pass rusher, but he could be a solid number two. They took Brandon Dorlus in the fourth round. He's kind of a tweener that's not really big enough to play defensive tackle, but he's not athletic enough to be a stand-up edge rusher. But if they can find kind of a hybrid role for him, I think he could have some success. He has good length, he's quick with his hands, he's got a club swim that's really effective. He does a good job of using hesitation and stutter steps to set up his bull rush and get the tackle off guard. I just think the main question for Brandon Dorlus is fitting cleanly into one positional archetype, so they've got to have a plan for him. In the fifth round, they took Notre Dame linebacker JD Bertrand. He's undersized with very short arms, but quick play recognition. He will just lay his body on the line and blast into a block to completely disrupt the spacing and timing of a play. He just doesn't have great speed to keep up with outside runs, also really struggles in man coverage to stay connected with vertical routes, and then the lack of length really limits his tackling range and his ability to stack and shed. In the sixth round, they took Alabama running back Jace McClellan, 5'10", 221. He's a solid between the tackles runner. He's got decent fluidity to get in and out of jump cuts. I think he had a drop early in the season, but for the most part, he was a reliable check down option, didn't run any kind of like advanced route tree, but I don't think he has the speed or explosiveness to be much of a big play threat. Casey Washington out of Illinois, I didn't watch, and then Zion Logue was one of my lower graded players in this class. He's big and he looks like an NFL starter, but not really a major impact in either phase. So I'm going with a D for the Atlanta Falcons. I thought the top two picks were some of the worst value in this class. Braylon Trice and Brandon Dorlus were at least appropriate value, but I honestly feel like this was a major missed opportunity for the Falcons. And speaking of missed opportunities, we've got the Carolina Panthers. They start up with a trade up into the first round to take South Carolina receiver Xavier Legette. He's big and fast and had some dominant wins in contested situations. I thought his physicality at the catch point was inconsistent. He wasn't a Rome Odunze level jump ball winner, but pretty good contested target, I would say. He has the ability to violently explode out of route breaks. Like, he can make an in-cut cut and really separate out of his break. His footwork was pretty inconsistent though. He didn't always get out of breaks cleanly. Sometimes he would kind of just drift into the top of the route without much of a plan, but he has the physical traits to run the kind of routes that they're going to have him run. He just needs to get more consistent with his footwork. Being a fifth-year senior with a late breakout does kind of concern me. There are some extenuating circumstances that explain the late breakout, but my biggest issue with Xavier Legette is beating press coverage. I think of the top 15 to 20 receivers in this class, you could argue that he's the worst against press. If he's going to be an X receiver, that's something he's going to have to develop from the ground up. At 46, they took Texas running back Jonathan Brooks. He would have been my top ranked back if he wasn't coming off an ACL tear. I just think that, you're expecting to get a lot of value from a running back in their rookie contract, and coming off the ACL, it's fair to expect it to take a season for him to fully recover. But he's just a balanced, well-rounded running back. He's a solid athlete, some of the best vision and patience in this class. After the first couple weeks, he didn't have a single drop in 2023. He's a great pass protector, only has one career fumble. I love the spatial awareness at the second level to maneuver through traffic and set up blocks, but he is kind of an upright runner. I don't think he has great contact balance. Sometimes he'll get caught from behind. I don't think he's the most dynamic in open space, but I think he is a good prospect, and once he gets back to 100%, I expect him to be a productive player. I'm just not sure that with where the Panthers are in terms of roster construction, that it's the best use of resources to spend a second round pick at running back. In the third round, they take Kentucky linebacker Trevin Wallace, and he is a pure project. He has the prototypical size and movement skills. He's got long arms. He's fast, explosive. He isn't the most fluid athlete moving side to side. You'll see that in some man coverage situations, but outside of that, he's like A+ across the board in terms of just natural traits and athleticism. His problem is that at this point, he's just reacting. He's not really reading the play. Someone with his speed and closing burst should be around the football a lot more often. He falls for pretty much any eye candy or motion that the offense throws at him. This is a player that I don't think should play as a rookie. If he's able to put everything together from a key and diagnosis standpoint, he could be one of the best linebackers in the NFL. And he is a young player, so I get wanting to bet on that, but unless he's just taken a major step this spring in terms of reading the game, I don't really see him contributing early. In the fourth round, they get a value pick with Texas tight end Jatavian Sanders. He's a solid athlete. Everyone was trying to sell me that he's this elite athlete. I didn't really see it. I don't know if it's because he's a 5-star recruit, but his speed and explosiveness I think are above average. Where he really wins and adds value is as a possession receiver. 0 drops in 2023, outstanding focus in tight windows. It's between Sanders and Cade Stover for best hands of any tight end in this class, and I would go with Sanders. But like I said, the movement skills I think are adequate. Not a player that's going to really separate on a consistent basis, and he doesn't create much at all after the catch. And then you just can't trust him or really have him in compromising situations as a blocker. He gets uprooted and just tossed aside if he has to block anyone besides a linebacker or a DB. He did flash some potential as a move blocker on screens and outside runs, but there were also a lot of plays where he just took really bad angles into contact, or he would be passive, engaging with the block, and he'd kind of race for contact instead of initiating it. They took Washington State corner Chau Smith-Wade in the 5th round. I think he'll definitely be a slot in the NFL. He's undersized and pretty slow, got beat down the field consistently, and had a really rough Senior Bowl. In the 6th round, they went with Mississippi State defensive lineman Jaden Crumedy. I think he's pretty athletic. He can flow with outside zone, make some chase down tackles. He's got heavy hands. He can generate knockback on initial contact. And as a pass rusher, he has a really nice club swim, which is pretty much his go-to move. I think he's a 3 technique only though. He struggles to hold the point against double teams. He doesn't have a lot of counters as a pass rusher, and his bull rush was pretty ineffective. And then Michael Barrett in the 7th round, the Michigan linebacker, I think does a lot of nice things in coverage. He's quick to process route concepts in zone coverage. He can turn around and locate the ball if he's running with a tight end down the seam, and he does a good job of reading the quarterback's eyes, getting his hands into the passing window. He also adds a lot as a blitzer. He's got good timing. He can power through blitz pickup. 3 forced fumbles in 2023. I think 2 of those were as a pass rusher, and then he can also be a core special teams player, but he's undersized and a pretty limited athlete, not someone that's going to consistently stack and shed and deal with contact that well. I don't really see him as a 3-down linebacker. I think he's more of a special teams player, but could carve out some sort of coverage role. So these are my 2 least favorite draft classes back to back. I don't think their reaches were as bad as the Falcons, and I am going to give it a D+ for that reason. But when I look at their top 5 picks, they got an X receiver that can't beat press, a running back coming off an ACL injury, a project linebacker, a possession tight end that you can't put on the line of scrimmage, and a small and slow corner. Feel free to use that as the intro to the hype video when this becomes the best draft class of all time, but I just don't really think they improved their team that much. I did have a couple of their UDFAs written up. Jalen Coker out of Holy Cross is a really good contested catch receiver. He's big. He had a 42.5-inch vertical jump. His speed kind of tops out after that initial burst off the line of scrimmage, and it'll be a major adjustment going up against NFL man coverage, but I thought he should have gotten drafted. And then Damani Richardson is a big and slow box safety that's a good run defender, but very limited in coverage. Next up, we've got the New Orleans Saints, who started off their draft with Oregon State tackle Taliesa Fuanga. They had a massive need at tackle. Probably one of the biggest needs of any team across the entire NFL was the Saints needing a tackle, and they took Fuanga, who I think could play tackle, but I really view best at guard. He's probably the best run blocker in this class, certainly the most physically dominant. He can just lift and flatten a defensive lineman off the line of scrimmage. He decimates targets at the second level. He can carve out space in the power run game. He can explode out of his stance and cover ground as a puller. You want him to be slightly less focused on going for the kill shot when he gets to the NFL and just worry more about consistently securing contact at the second level. But outside of that, it's hard to have too many concerns about Fuaga as a run blocker. And in pass pro, he's got a stiff, firm punch. He likes to throw the outside hand really aggressively. That can get him into trouble because if they swipe down the outside hand, he doesn't have the elite recovery skills to protect the corner. That's the main technical thing in pass pro that he needs to work out. I just felt like his range and slide quickness and recovery skills on the outside were kind of limited or questionable at least. And you combine that with shorter arms, I felt like it was a pretty easy move inside, but I fully expect the Saints to try him out at tackle, at least to start out. And he's not a player like Graham Barton, who we'll get into, for example, where it's like there's no chance that he can play tackle. He's a 100% move inside type of player. I think Fuaga could play tackle, but I think he has all pro potential as a guard. For the most part, he has a solid anchor, but he definitely relied on just play strength over technique to resist power rushes. Against most players he faced, that was enough, but Braylon Trice was able to walk him back a couple times. So I think Fuaga is a really solid prospect. I had him graded a little bit lower than the Saints took him. I would have gone with Amarius Mims, but for the Saints, I understand being kind of risk averse with their tackle selections. And then they trade up to 41 to get Alabama corner Kool-Aid McKinstry, a very technically sound corner that's been a starter for Nick Saban since he arrived on campus. He led FBS corners in pass breakups in 2022 and then only had one last year, but he got half as many targets. I don't worry about his ability to play the ball. I think the fact that his targets got cut in half tells you more about him as a player than the pass breakups. He played most of his snaps in press man, and in press coverage, he's extremely patient. You rarely see him strike aggressively with his hands and risk overextending himself. He's going to wait for the receiver to declare his release, just shuffle step, mirror them, and then connect to the route. And when he's able to get in phase, he has enough fluidity and really good anticipation to stick tightly to the break. But if he gets out of phase and there's like a step or two of separation before the break point, he doesn't really have that short area burst to reconnect to the route. And I also think there's a reason that he wasn't as aggressive at the line of scrimmage. He doesn't have elite recovery speed. He will get stacked vertically and struggle to close off that separation down the field. So I think he's a really good cornerback prospect. I viewed him in the same tier as guys like Kamari Lassiter, Ennis Rakestraw out of Missouri. Technically sound player that would be a first round pick if they were a better athlete, but to get him at 41, even though you had to trade some day 3 picks, I think absolutely worth it. At 150, they took Spencer Rattler out of South Carolina. He's one of the most accurate quarterbacks in this class. He ranked 3rd in the FBS in on-target percentage. He has a clean, concise throwing motion. Every throw looks the exact same, and the ball placement is very consistent. He had one of the worst offensive lines in 2023 that I've ever seen, so he got plenty of experience operating under pressure. There were so many plays in 2023 that were just unevaluatable because he had no chance. There was nobody open. The pressure got there so quickly. But I do think he is partially to blame for some of the pressures and some of the sacks. His height is a real limitation as far as his ability to see through pressure and throw over compressed pockets. If he's got interior pressure and it's 3rd and 4, he's got a wide open sit route 5 yards right down center field, there's a lot of times where he just can't identify it and he ends up taking a bad sack. He also has a bad habit of climbing up into pressure and then just kind of hovering around the line of scrimmage, and that allows all the pass rushers to just disengage from their blocks and close in on him. And when he's given time, he can operate within structure, but the overall decision making for the last 2 years has just been so inconsistent. So I know there were some teams that had 2nd or 3rd round grades on him. That's too rich for me, but to get him in the 5th round, I think is great value. Their 2nd, 5th round pick was Pittsburgh wide receiver Bub Means, a size speed demon, 6'1", 212 pounds, long arms, ran a 4.43, had a 39.5-inch vertical. He can outrun corners down the field. It's not elite initial burst, but his build-up speed, he usually ends up outpacing pretty much everyone. He's pretty good against press coverage. I didn't think he was a very sudden or fluid route runner, but at the line of scrimmage, he's got light feet and a pretty diverse release package, and then pretty good in contested catch situations, does a good job of shielding corners from the ball, establishing his catch space, and high pointing it in the air. And their final 5th round pick is Texas linebacker Jalen Ford. He has really good size at 6'2", 240 pounds. He can shed blocks. He has good stopping power as a tackler, and he's very communicative and alert pre-snap. His speed is just average. He will struggle to keep up with perimeter runs, and I think he's purely an early down linebacker. I don't see a lot of coverage skills or upside. Part of it's that he just doesn't have a great feel in zone coverage. He can get manipulated and widened out of passing lanes. There were also multiple plays where he just wouldn't pick up a mesh concept and he'd leave a receiver running wide open down the field, and I don't think he has much man coverage potential, but he could be a solid early down run defender. In the 6th round, they took Northern Iowa defensive lineman Christian Boyd. He's a massive nose tackle with unfortunately short arms, but I think he can give you a little bit in both phases. He could be a nose tackle that has some pass rushing value. In the run game, he's extremely violent with his hands. He can stack and shed and lift the blocker's pad level, but he's got to be early with his punch because he does have short arms, and when blockers can get their hands on his frame and control the interaction, he has a hard time disengaging. As a pass rusher, he's actually fairly technically proficient. He's got a club swim, club rip, and he has a relentless motor and excellent stamina. He played 57 snaps per game, and I don't think he took a single one of those snaps off, but his bull rush wasn't that effective, which is pretty concerning against FCS competition. And to really generate much movement as a power rusher, he has to lean and overextend, and he can get snatch trapped and put on the ground. Their 7th round pick, Joshua Ezerim, I didn't watch, but he is a massive offensive tackle out of Eastern Kentucky, 6'6", 329 pounds, almost 36-inch arms, and he had some pretty decent testing in the 40-yard dash and the jumps. And then as far as UDFAs, I had 2 of them written up for the Saints. Dallin Holker, the Colorado State tight end, has really good hands. I think probably after Jatavian Sanders and Cade Stover, he would be the next tight end. Not a very good blocker, doesn't seem interested in that phase, and he can change directions, but his straight line speed is just average. And then Nook Bradford out of TCU is a fast and explosive center fielding safety, but an older player that struggles with play diagnosis and a very inconsistent tackler. So I'm giving the Saints class a C+. There weren't too many major reaches. I thought Kool-Aid McKinstry was really good value, even though they did have to trade up for him. I don't think they gave up a whole lot to move to 41. Spencer Rattler at 150 is a good dart throw, and Bub Means, Jalen Ford, Christian Boyd, I think have some interesting skill sets in the middle of day 3. And finally, we've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who I think had the best class in this division pretty easily, but one of the best draft classes in the entire NFL. Graham Barton at 26, the Duke left tackle, who's definitely going to move inside, probably at center. He's one of the most athletic players in this class. 100th percentile 10-yard split for center prospects, had a 7.31 3-cone, which is 94th percentile. He has the ability to succeed in any blocking scheme. He's got the athletic traits to be a weapon as a puller. He's a really good good zone blocker, but then he's got the play strength to create displacement off the line of scrimmage and move people in the power run game. For the most part, he's technically sound in pass protection. He's patient and accurate with his hands. There are some times that he strikes late and he doesn't have the elite length, so he'll let blockers into his frame. And then his play strength in pass pro is probably below average, so that will give him some problems against bull rushes. He's got to be more consistent with his strike timing to protect himself against power. But Tampa Bay needed to fortify the interior of their O-line, and I think Graham Barton is one of the best options in this class to accomplish that. I love the Chris Braswell pick in the second round. I think he was an underrated player this year. He's a good athlete. He's got a long arm, speed to power that can really displace the pocket, and then he also has a really effective cross chop to win the outside and good bend dipping around the corner. He's a little bit undersized. I think he was a good run defender for his size, but there will probably be some limitations on early downs. I also think it's fair to question whether his power rushing efficiency will translate against better competition, but I thought he was a top 40 player, so I love that pick at 57. Also love the Tyke Smith pick at 89. He is a versatile physical defensive back, one of the best block shedding defensive backs that I've ever seen, especially pound for pound. Like, there's no reason someone at his size should be able to just dominate blocks out in the alley like he does. He played more slot corner in Georgia's defense. He's pretty fluid in man coverage. His speed, I would say, is average. He ran a good 40 time, but when he had to cover vertical routes, it felt like he was really hanging on by a thread to keep up with them. I'm not sure exactly what defensive back position he's going to play. I just know that he's a talented, impactful defensive back, definitely worth taking in the third round. And then 4 straight really good picks with Washington receiver Jalen McMillan. He's a skilled route runner, does a good job selling his routes and setting up corners to create as much separation as possible out of his breaks. He has precise footwork and the change of direction skills to be a consistent separator. His main issue is that he just struggles to catch the ball through contact, and he's not very dynamic out in open space, not much of a yak threat. I'm surprised Jalen McMillan made it this far in the draft, but a great job by the Bucs to scoop him up. In the 4th round, they got Bucky Irving, who is a dynamic running back that just tested really poorly. He has sudden start-stop ability, human joystick type of mover in the open field. He's creative out in open space. He's got really impressive contact balance for a player of his size. Solid hands out of the backfield. I think he's got the quickness to separate as a route runner, although he didn't run a very advanced or translatable route tree in Oregon's offense. My main hang-up with Bucky Irving is that he's one of the worst pass blockers in this class, and it's hard to really carve out a third down role as a running back if you can't be trusted in protection, but I have no issues with this pick in the 4th round. In the 6th round, they took Elijah Klein, who I hadn't watched, but a lot of smart people really like him as a sleeper, so I'll defer to them. And then their 7th round pick was Washington tight end Devin Culp, ran the fastest 40-yard dash of any tight end at the combine, 4.47. I don't think he gives you much more than speed down the seam. He can't really hold up as a run blocker. Very labored lateral movement skills. He stumbles out of breaks frequently, but with his speed alone, I think he could be a weapon on some like play action shot plays as the 3rd tight end, leaking out of the formation. Definitely understand that pick at the end of the 7th round. So I'm giving this Bucs class an A. I do not throw around A's. I only ended up with 2 or 3 A's this year, but I think their first 4 picks were close to slam dunks. Their next 2 were solid, understandable, and Devin Culp I wasn't huge on, but it's a 7th round pick. And then the one UDFA I had written up was Marcus Banks, who's kind of a slot corner safety hybrid, really bad tackler. Outside of speed and movement skills, I didn't see a whole lot of upside.